Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. Up next, we have a discussion with former astronaut, one of only 2 women to have commanded the space shuttle, and NASA's Deputy Administrator, Pam Melroy. She'll come up and deliver brief remarks about her vision for the future of space exploration, followed by a moderated Q&A discussion using the Slido app. So without further ado, Pam Melroy.
Thank you, Jackie. Every time I come on stage, I have to do this. Bring it down. I am delighted to be here. It's really an honor to represent NASA at the 72nd International Astronautical Congress. It's been a whirlwind at IAC so far. There's no doubt the best part has been meeting old friends and deepening relationships with new friends, especially given the difficulties of the last year and a half. You know, I've been to several IAC sessions over the years, but this one feels special to me. I think we've learned a lot over the last year and a half. One of the things that we have learned, which is very positive, is that we can find ways to stay connected, even when it's impossible to travel. And I think that's given us some opportunities for greater types of inclusiveness. On the other hand, there is nothing quite like the special spark that happens when we gather together, especially those of us in the space community who are united by our passion. So the last decade has been pretty extraordinary. We've had amazing output and growth in the commercial space industry, and multiple space agencies have been started around the world, including 3 just in the last year. It's clear from our meetings this week that other agencies are recognizing the high impact of commercial on our industry. It's excellent jobs, it's a high growth industry, and it's creating capabilities for countries as well in other industries such as agriculture and fishing, which are really important to stay ahead. But this magic surge in growth didn't just happen because of some technological breakthrough. Actually, it's the result of decades of input and research by NASA and others in space technologies. Specifically, I can point back to NASA's intuition that the commercial industry was ready to take cargo to the space station without the oversight of NASA. That was a revolution, because before that, we were kind of going downhill. What I mean is, all the commercial space industry in the United States had gone offshore. We'd had some mishaps in the 90s that caused us to focus on mission assurance, which was a good thing, but it did drive up the cost of launch. And then our satellites going on orbit, if you were building a satellite and launch was very expensive and you couldn't afford to replace your satellite, you put more redundancy on your satellite just to make sure it worked when you got into space. And then it got heavier, and then it got more expensive to launch, and so on, and so on, and so on. NASA's investment, and also the Department of Defense and others, in companies like SpaceX and Northrop Grumman enabled a completely different approach. It brought lower cost access to space with a cascade of events that followed. This was aligned with our interests to reduce the cost of cargo to the space station so that we could focus on other things, but it created rideshare opportunities and science opportunities as well on the International Space Station. Many innovative satellites and other technologies died on the vine because they were waiting for a ride to space. Having a regular train and a regular manifest enabled people to move a lot faster, and that's how we've seen this incredible surge in innovation. NASA is proud of its role and responsibility in helping to jumpstart the commercial space energy. I think back, just one example is when I was flying on the space shuttle, we had the space shuttle and the Soyuz that could take humans to space. Well, today we have multiple suborbital and orbital vehicles capable of taking people to space. All right, I'm finished looking in the rearview mirror. It was a pretty awesome decade, but what do we have going forward? Well, today, NASA and our partnerships around the world are an engine for commercial space, and that's very important for the economy and jobs. But engines run on fuel. And what is that fuel? Our fuel is exploration. Our fuel is pushing us to do harder and harder projects, pushing out into the solar system, challenging ourselves to develop new and more challenging technologies, the things that it takes to get us to go to the moon and Mars. Of course, it's about the science. We're laser focused on that. For example, since landing in the Jezero crater last February, the Perseverance Mars rover has collected its first samples, which will be the first scientifically selected samples returned to Earth from another planet as part of NASA and ESA's Mars Sample Return campaign. This is particularly interesting because we believe the Jezero crater, more than 3.5 billion years ago, had river channels spilling out over the crater wall, which created a lake. We think this is the most likely place to find signs of life on Mars. So it's a very, very important location for our samples. We conduct missions like this one because science tells us more about life on Earth. One of the things that we think could revolutionize everything we know about biology is to discover biology that developed on a completely different planet, completely separate from the chemistry of Earth and all the environment that we have here. Those insights would be incredible and help us understand our own biology better. We think there are more insights that we could find from exploring our own solar system about the formation of the Earth. As I said, we believe Mars was previously wet. Well, understanding how it became the dry, barren planet it is today will help ensure that Earth does not go down that same path in the future. As I said, the exploration is also the fuel that we need not just to solve those problems, but to push out to commercial industry to feed the growth. We should be thinking about that as we go forward in exploration. We are going back to the moon, but we're very clear that the reason that why we're going is so that we can prepare to send humans to Mars, to continue to do science, more science than can be done autonomously. So we have a pretty good near-term plan. We've got a rocket, a big rocket. Teams at NASA's Kennedy Space Center have fully stacked the Space Launch System, NASA's monster moon rocket, and we're preparing for the launch of Artemis 1 in February, and I can't wait to see that. We have the only spacecraft designed for humans to survive in deep space, Orion, that will be flying on Artemis 1, and the ground systems to support those capabilities. We're working on Gateway, a lunar logistics cache, and which may also be an outpost for us to jump off as the gateway to the solar system and into the future. And hopefully soon, NASA and our commercial partner will begin working on a human landing system to take us down to the surface of the moon. So there's a lot happening right now, and when you start to look out over the horizon, you see a lot more. We're going to need more technologies to keep humans alive on the surface of the moon, but also in a transport vehicle to Mars, a vehicle that will take us down to the surface of Mars and allow us to lift back up into orbit. Well, when you just look at those technologies, it's pretty staggering, but I'm going to add more. There's a lot more. We need infrastructure on the ground to support these systems. Infrastructure like communications, position, navigation, and timing. It's power, it's ISRU, it's landing pads to make it easier, and many other things we take for granted every day here on Earth. But here on Earth, it's infrastructure like that that supports the growth of commercial industry. And we have no reason to think it will be any different in space. So we have to be thinking about that infrastructure to support a sustained human presence, but also industry in the future. One of the things that I'm very excited about is thinking about what tools we will need to perform science with humans on another planet. So in the days of Apollo, we gave our Apollo astronauts a box at the end of a stick and a bag to carry the rocks back to Earth. Incredible riches that have helped us understand the formation of the moon and what it tells us about the formation of the solar system. But you know, I can't help thinking we could do a little better now. Now, what does that mean? Will we fully recreate every laboratory capability here on Earth and space? Maybe, maybe not. We need to develop a framework, though, of understanding what tools will be most efficient for humans doing science on the surface of another celestial body. I'd like to give a simple example. If we can set up the infrastructure right, perhaps we can crowdsource through VR and have humans on Earth who don't have the opportunity to go to the moon to do citizen science by putting on a headset and observing the moon from close up and taking a look at where we should be looking more closely for scientific evidence. So from the standpoint of the international community, this is a pretty enormous enterprise. Collaboration is in our DNA. All the way back to the start of NASA, we collaborated with international partners. The International Space Station has taught us how powerful it is to work with our partners. We cannot even imagine not taking the next step together with those partners. And personally, I'm very concerned about setting standards and norms as we push out into the solar system. How do we ensure that we're responsible and that we're doing the right environmental things? We worry here about orbital debris in low Earth orbit. Well, should we be worried about orbital debris around the moon? We're not even talking about it yet. But maybe we have an opportunity to think differently about this from the very beginning in a way that we did not here in low Earth orbit, and I think we should. That means it's important for us to partner with international partners who are like-minded, partners who believe in the same principles that we do around protecting the environment and space for all, about being open and transparent about what we're doing, about sharing our science, and about helping each other. Those are the values that matter. We want to bring the best of humanity out with us into the solar system. These are also the principles articulated in the Artemis Accords, a very practical, simple set of principles modeled on the Outer Space Treaty to guide space exploration cooperation among nations participating in the agency's 21st century lunar and Mars exploration. And yesterday, I'm proud to say, the Polish Space Agency joined nations around the world as the newest member of the Artemis Accords. International cooperation on Artemis is intended not only to bolster our space exploration from a technological standpoint, but also to enhance peaceful relationships between nations. Therefore, at the core of the Artemis Accords is the requirement that all activities will be conducted for peaceful purposes. So at the IAC this year, I have definitely heard tremendous interest in protecting the outer space environment for the future, your future. And I look forward to many more nations around the world joining NASA and our partners in making this commitment. It's very important when we look at this future architecture that I discussed that we share responsibility for the technical pieces, but we're also developing those principles together as we go forward. I'm excited as we work on our architecture together about being able to share it with our international partners and come to agreements about how we are going to divide and share responsibilities. I've also been very happy this week to hear the discussions around space agencies' roles in combating climate change. As we work together to achieve the next giant leap, it's also important to reflect why we do all of this. It's for science, it's for exploration, but most of all, it's about improving life here on Earth. When people think of space, they think of the groundbreaking Hubble Space Telescope imagery or astronauts on the International Space Station. Or maybe if you're a dreamer, one day becoming a multiplanetary species. But the value of our work together isn't confined just to space. At NASA, we always look up and push out into the universe. But central to our mission is looking back and protecting our spaceship, Spaceship Earth, the spaceship of all humanity. NASA's researchers, innovators, and pioneers are all on the forefront of climate action. NASA's Earth observation and research supports President Biden's climate agenda, which outlines putting the climate crisis at the center of our country's foreign policy and national security. NASA's new Earth System Observatory will expand that expertise, providing the world with an unprecedented understanding of our Earth's climate, arming us with the data that we need to mitigate climate change and protect our communities in the face of natural disasters. And the development of the first of these satellites as part of the Earth System Observatory, NISAR, is already underway with our partners at ISRO, a terrific example. The mission will integrate 2 radars, one from each of our agencies that are optimized in their own way to allow the mission to observe a wider range of changes than either one alone, a great example of how we're better together than we are alone. Climate change is impacting our communities. The cost is enormous, both financially and in loss of life. It's loss of livelihoods and communities. And unless we act together, the least among us will suffer disproportionately, and instability will increase around the world. It's going to take all of us. Sometimes I get asked, doesn't all this cooperation and partnership make everything a lot more complicated? Well, yes, it does. But there's an old proverb, anecdotally from Africa, which I like, that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. On behalf of NASA, I want to underscore that we want to go far, and we want to go together. Thank you. And I'll be happy to take some questions.
Just a reminder that you can submit questions via the Slido app. We've already gotten quite a few. So here's a good one. How can countries without space agencies get involved in Artemis? Does NASA only collaborate with other space agencies or also non-spacefaring countries?
Well, let's see. I'll start by saying that there are huge challenges, and I can tell you because I've worked with new space agencies. I've worked with countries that are trying to pull things together to support their commercial space industry and their research. It can be very challenging, and I'll tell you why. This is something that we have to work on changing, but the truth is, up until recently, all space actors have been the government. So what that means is our laws, our treaties, and our policies emphasize government activities. Therefore, it can be extremely challenging to work together across countries without the blessing and the agreement of your government that it's important to do so. Now, you don't have to have a space agency to do that. I can name multiple MOUs with countries that don't have space agencies but have important facilities or important science research. Usually there's a science organization involved, though, in the government. We would like to support that. We think that's really important. I just want to explain some of the practical barriers to that.
So next up, when are we going to start flying Artemis missions? I think you addressed that a little bit, but maybe if you go in a little bit more.
February, we're going to see a rocket go to the moon for the first time in more than 50 years. I'm pretty excited.
And what does NASA have to do with climate change?
That's a great question. I wish I knew who asked it, because I've heard that actually before. I've heard it in the United States. I've even heard it from senior political leaders. They don't realize NASA is the eyes in the sky. We have multiple satellites, many in partnership with our international partners, that is the data that provides us knowledge about the changes in the Earth system. We share that data mostly with other government partners, but we're recognizing that we need to find a way to provide that data to everyone in a more easily digestible way so that you don't have to be a climate scientist to understand the data that we're presenting. So we're working together with our partners to figure out how we can do better. But I can tell you, NASA and its partners provide 80% of the data that we use to understand what's happening on Earth.
When are the Mars samples from Perseverance slated to return to Earth?
Not soon enough. The Mars sample return is currently scheduled for the early 2030s. We have some work to do ahead of us. We're going to have Perseverance actually meander a fairly long distance, over 4 kilometers, looking for the most intriguing places to take samples. They're going to take multiple samples and store them in a little box, I call it the backpack, carry it around, and in fact cache some of the samples in various places. And then in cooperation with the European Space Agency, we will then be sending a vehicle that's capable of bringing them home and a little rover that will ferry them back and forth between Perseverance and the ascent vehicle. So that's going to be a really interesting mission to watch.
Could the UAE be possibly joining the Artemis program?
Well, we're happy to say that the UAE is a signatory of the Artemis Accords. That's absolutely the first step, and we are in active discussion with all kinds of partnership, and of course we're very interested in the steps forward. We really need to have a broader conversation, as I talked about, this big architecture, which we're just beginning to see the shape of, and I promise you that conversations are committed to continue, so stay tuned.
So how does NASA aim to support youth commercial initiatives in the space sector?
Wow. So NASA is a big supporter of all sorts of STEM activities. I can say that we fund STEM activities in the United States in every state in our country. We are also promoting connections with universities through various grants. Both our aeronautics and our space technology mission directorate does work with universities to do research. That's a key part of that. We believe in the pipeline that we have to develop. I think all countries are feeling that way. We're a sponsor of the Space Generation Advisory Committee, or Council, I should say, which I had the opportunity to talk at their Congress. I mean, I'm just a huge fan because we have to bring people together from all around the world. I mean, on Space Station, we started from scratch to build some of those partnerships, and now they're very deep and rich. But I think this generation that is participating in the Congress this year and next year and in the near term, in 20 years, they will be the leaders of the space industry, and they will already have those relationships in place. And I can't wait to see what they're going to do.
This has been a big one this week. What is NASA doing to mitigate the issue of space debris?
Yeah, space debris is a very important subject. One of the things that happened as soon as the transition occurred is NASA stood up an orbital debris working group. It's quite an interesting subject if you've ever looked into it. There's multiple things that you have to think about. Some of them have to do with the space environment. One of the things that's actually fairly poorly understood is how debris interacts with the environment in low Earth orbit. It's really easy to think, oh, well, it's a vacuum and everything's just, going around and following Kepler's laws and the laws of physics. In fact, that's not true. Things like solar radiation, solar flux, particles, and there's even some drag in low Earth orbit. And so that's having an impact on that debris. So understanding that so that we can model it, that's a very important part. Of course, we also have an orbital debris working group which developed the orbital debris mitigation standard practices. They do a lot of modeling in that area and partner all over the world, actually, so that we can share those models so that we can understand the debris environment better. I asked them to come up with a list of options for the highest impact research. NASA is a technology organization. We are not a policy organization per se. So we're focused on the modeling and the technologies that are needed to address the issue.
And we also hear this one a lot. How can exploring space benefit humanity?
Well, I gave a couple of examples. For me, the biology one is very exciting. This is the way I like to frame it. We all, went through science in grade school and high school and learned how to perform experiments. And if you can change one thing at a time, you can get tremendous insight by comparing the changes that occur when one parameter is changed. One of the things that we've already seen on the International Space Station is the enormous changes that occur in microgravity in the human body. I'll give you a very simple example. When you go to space, the fluids in your body shift, and so the fluid in your legs and your thoracic cavity spread through your whole body. They actually give you a headache. Your face gets puffy. It's very uncomfortable. But after a couple of days, you sweat it out, you urinate it out, and you come to a new stable point. But that stable point is highly dehydrated by the standards that we live here on Earth. So one of the big risks of being dehydrated is getting kidney stones. But astronauts don't get them. So why don't we get kidney stones in space? Why is it not a huge risk? So this is one of a huge area of study right now that I think is really important. If we can understand why astronauts don't get kidney stones, we can develop approaches to ensure that people don't get kidney stones here on Earth. That those insights into our own body, developing very tiny flames that are so efficient they burn every drop of fuel. Well, who cares about that? Well, it's the wasted fuel that's the emissions. We can develop better combustion engines that are much more efficient and totally reduce their emissions. Those are just a couple of examples, and I pointed out the example of biology on Mars and comparing it, and also the climate of Mars and comparing it to Earth.
Our most liked question is, how can we shift the focus from space militarization to cooperation and sustainability in space? What role can NASA play in enabling this shift in values?
Well, I think we've never shifted from those values. NASA has always been about scientific and peaceful exploration. And I have to say, it is a tremendous honor to be the Deputy Administrator at NASA, because if there's one thing I've learned, it's the most powerful brand, and I was going to say on Earth, but I might say in the solar system. It is a powerful brand. It does unite people and bring people together. That sense of awe and wonder that we all feel. I know you're all here because you're passionate about space, just like I am. So I think the things that we do together are incredibly important, and the Artemis Accords is a big part of that. It's about creating peaceful cooperation that stabilizes the world. It gives us a chance to dialogue with each other and understand each other so there are no misunderstandings in space.
So given that this is a GNF discussion, I want to close with this one, which is, how can we mentor the next generation to empower more women to take on leadership roles in space?
That's a wonderful question. I think I myself look back and realized how inspired I was by the Apollo program. And there were no women in the program then, but somehow my parents told me that I could do anything. And you know what? I believed them. We believe the things that our parents and our teachers and our leaders tell us in our hearts. And I believed that, so I didn't quit. I said, I'm going to be an astronaut, and I'm going to be a test pilot and do all these things, even though women were not allowed to when I made that decision. I was very fortunate. I was born at a time when the doors were beginning to open. We have a few more doors we need to continue to push open, but I will say that it's incredibly important to have senior leaders. This is something I understand, because if you can see it, you believe it. I'll tell you a story. When I commanded the space shuttle, I was pretty sure, even when I was a little girl, my parents will tell you this, I was pretty sure that I was going to be a spaceship commander someday. I was very confident in that. My parents gave me the confidence to believe in myself. And as we prepared to fly into space, some schedules changed and shifted, and suddenly it became clear that when we went up to the space station, Dr. Peggy Whitson, my colleague and good friend, was going to be the first woman to command the space station. Now, I promise you, I always knew I was going to be a spaceship commander, but it never occurred to me that 2 women would command spacecraft at the same time in space. And it just goes to show you that whatever we're doing, there's always a bigger dream and there's always more potential. So we have to continue to think that way and inspire. There's so much potential here on Earth. We can't afford to ignore 50% of the population as we go forward. So I just encourage everyone to not quit and to keep going and to support each other.
And I think on that wonderful note, we'll wrap it up. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Jackie.